Okay guys, welcome back to another Monster Hunter Wilds video. And in this video we are going to talk about the small monsters from Monster Hunter Wilds. And you know, we've already covered all the endemic life, we've already covered the aquatic life. Now we're moving up to the small monsters, and then I'll probably start talking to you guys about the larger monsters, how to kill them, you know, a bit of background about them. And that's kind of what I want to do in this this video actually. I want to talk about the small monsters, where where they can be found, some interesting mechanics, you know, certain sightings, their behavior, unique traits, that kind of thing, and the materials that you can get from them and what they can be used for as well. So yeah, that's sort of what I want to talk about today. So I'm going to go through every single small monster throughout Monster Hunter Wilds. So yes, stay tuned guys. Well, as you know guys, the world of Monster Hunter Wilds is a wild, weird and absolutely crawling with life. But while everyone's hyped for the big elder dragons and terrifying new threats, today we are shining the spotlight on the little guys. So from scavenging winged drakes to pesky pack hunters, the small monsters aren't just background noise though. They shape the ecosystem just like the endemic life. They change your hunts, and sometimes they can steal the show. Sometimes they can be incredibly useful on the hunts. Quite often attacking some of the larger monsters as well, which can be really, really useful. Sometimes paralyzing. It can be brilliant. So grab your secret guys, sharpen your blades, and let's break down every single small monster we've seen so far in Monster Hunter Worlds and why they matter more than you think. Okay guys, so the first one on our list is the Bornos, and this was actually introduced firstly in Monster Hunter Wilds, and it's classified as a winged drake. So they're kind of known for their scavenging behavior, often sort of feasting on carcasses rather than engaging in direct combat. So they're quite passive really, unless they're sort of provoked. So their habitat though is in the Windward Plains, so they can be found in a lot, you know, the deserty type areas, just like I'm showing you now in the clip. So such as area 4, area 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13 and 16. So typically any winged drake will try and avoid confrontation, sort of opting to scavenge for carcasses. They utilize their high vantage points to spot potential food sources. So, you know, it's kind of mimicking the birds of today, really. Any sort of predatory bird, that's kind of what they're like, really. Something unique about them is they possess a specialized thorax feathers that they can vibrate to produce a deafening roar, possibly as a defense mechanism or to communicate with others of their kind. So, and because of that specialized thorax feathers that they have, when we press circle, you know, in terms of the gameplay interactions, when we press circle as a PlayStation user, you can sort of pull it down to the ground. And once you've done that, you can actually get the thorax feather from them, which turns into a screamer pod, which, you know, any kind of seasoned Monster Hunter player will know is they can be used to actually pull like a Diablos up from underground. Anything up from underground, it can kind of stun it, and it can be really useful, especially against like a Balahara, for example. So yeah, really useful. And if you kill them and carve them, you can get winged drake hide, or if you're in you know, the later stages of the game, you can get winged drake hide plus as well, which is essential for crafting certain gear. So next on our list is the Blango, one that you might all be very, very familiar with. As you know, the Blango was actually introduced way back in 2006 in Monster Hunter 2, where it made its first appearance, and it's made several appearances since. I remember playing it, fighting Blango in Monster Hunter Freedom 2 as well, which I think that was my first game of the franchise I played anyway. And then it got reintroduced. Well, it was obviously part of Monster Hunter Generations and Generations Ultimate, and then it was reintroduced then in Monster Hunter Wilds. So yeah, in terms of what, you know, a little bit of info about the Blango, it's a small fanged beast known for its snow white fur and aggressive pack behavior. So For example, in Monster Hunter Wilds, Blangos continue to operate under the leadership of the larger Blangonga, just like in previous generations. They tend to respond swiftly to its commands, and they work together to eliminate threats in their territory. So nothing's really changed in that regard from previous Monster Hunter games, really. They still hunt in packs. They're still hanging around the Blangonga. They can be a bit of a pain when you're fighting the Blangonga as well. As they kind of suggest, and as most people know, they inhabit cold, mountainous regions, often in areas, so often places like the Aishar Cliffs. So their thick fur and strong muscles adapt and allow them to thrive in really harsh, snowy environments. So, key sort of characteristics about the Blango are they sort of exhibit coordinated backpack behavior. I said backpack then. No, not backpack behavior. They exhibit coordinated pack behavior, and they often attack in groups to overwhelm intruders. Their actions are also closely tied to Blangonga, which exerts tight control over the group. The one thing is, if you do try and get close to them, they are super aggressive, and they confront any trespassers in their territory. The physical adaptations they've developed strong muscles to quickly climb over ground and climb skill, and their skills are required. These sorts of skills are required in the mountainous habitats. In terms of calves and things like that, you can get a Blango pelt and a Blango pelt plus, again, which is used in crafting various pieces of gear. So, not a lot's changed from previous entries. What Monster Hunter Wilds introduced was that they've enhanced the AI coordination and their environmental interactions. So, because Wilds is more of an open world sort of design, it allows for more sort of dynamic encounters where Blangos can utilize the terrain to their advantage. So, yeah, that's Blangos. Okay, next on our list is the Bulakchi. I'm sure that's how you pronounce it. I'm not going to change my ways. So they're easily one of the creepiest little bugs in Monster Hunter Wilds. Really weird looking. They're actually they're actually new to the series, so they haven't been shown in any of the other previous installments. They are flightless neopterons. Oh my gosh, that's another word I can't really pronounce. And they kind of remind me of sort of bloated mosquitoes, who are kind of weird and hairy. And they tend to hang around carcasses, and they inject some kind of digestive acid into them, slurp it up, and then just kind of chill there, really fat and full. But of course, you don't want to ignore them. They tend to move in, swarms, because they're more like bugs. And if you're not paying attention, they'll mob you with stabs, body slams, and even pin you to the ground. It's pretty minging. It's pretty chaotic, and it happens quite quickly as well. What you can do is they are very sensitive to loud noises, so a good blast or roar can stun them as well. So use that to your advantage if you are a bit stuck, especially if they're crowding you. Like, you can use like a flash bomb or something like that. Drops wise, it's usual bug stuff. It's a bit of a low drop rate though on monster fluid. They do drop carapaces and maybe some monster broth at higher ranks as well. Nothing crazy, but some can be quite useful early on. So yeah, really they're like a creepier, grounded version of Vespoids. Not the most dangerous monster right there, but they add a lot of character to the Wilds ecosystem. Next on that list is the Ceratonoth. Ceratonoth? I don't know how. Again, another one I don't really know how to pronounce. It's sort of like the first herbivore you see in the game, really. It's a peaceful herbivore that plays quite a surprising role, really, in the ecosystem of Monster Hunter Wilds. I think they tend to resemble like pangolins. They kind of remind me of those, with like overlapping yellowish brown scales and long snouts. They're kind of like they move in large herds as well across the Windward Plains. So particularly areas like Area 8, Area 12, and Area 13. So yeah, very much like herd mentality kind of thing. They've got like an alpha, and then they've got like all the other females there, and the alpha will kind of alert them to danger, and they'll run. He'll kind of escort them away, sort of thing. The males tend to stand out with like a darker coloration and 3 prominent stripes on 3 prominent spikes. Why am I mixing up my words tonight? 3 prominent spikes on their backs. So, especially during like sandstorms, something really cool happens. So, like during sandstorms, these spikes act as like lightning rods, and they channel electricity safely into the ground to protect the herd, which is a really cool, unique aspect about them. They're typically quite docile and quick, and they, like I mentioned, they're quick to flee from threats. They tend to fall prey to large monsters like Doshiguma, and interestingly, small birds tend to perch on their backs, flying off at the first sight. Like I think it was called the Northpecker. That's where you can find a Northpecker. They tend to go on the backs of them as well. From a hunting perspective, though, Ceratonoths drop materials like herbivore shells and raw meat at low rank, and herbivore carapaces at high rank. Again, which are essential for crafting certain armor sets. So, while they might not really pose a threat, Ceratonoths are I think they're integral to the game's ecosystem. So, yeah, if you encounter them in your hunts, guys, share your experiences. Alright, let's talk about the Kamachi next. So, again, this is another one of the new small monsters that Capcom sort of introduced in Monster Hunter Wilds, and honestly, another weird one, a lot like the Bulakchi as well, very sort of similar. You tend to find them clinging to walls in the ice shard cliffs. They usually just sit there in little clusters, not moving around all that much. And, they're kind of easy. I think they're quite hard to sort of notice, to be honest. They just jump down when you go past them. Yeah, and like if you get too close, they'll just jab you with they look like kind of scorpion sort of tails, and what this does is it inflicts sleep on you. So one hit's not going to sort of knock you out, but if you're in a tight spot and they swarm you, then yeah, it can be quite problematic, to be honest. They drop sort of usual bug loot though, shells, monster fluid. Sometimes even sleep herbs though, so they're good for early crafting, especially if you're running sleep builds or looking to farm monster broth without having to deal with Vespoids. Speaking of which, though, if you've played the older games, they're kind of like a mix between the Vespoids and Altoroth. Vespoids would dive bomb you mid combo, and Altoroth just wandered around eating mushrooms. They just feel a bit more grounded, more like an actual part of the ecosystem, more than just annoyances, really. So they're not really going to ruin your hunt, but if you're not paying attention, they can be an absolute nuisance, especially if you're dealing with a big monster and suddenly you get hit with sleep. Alright guys, let's talk about a real throwback. The Conga is back in Monster Hunter Worlds, and honestly, I didn't think I'd be this happy to see that horrible pink monkey again. You'll tend to find them roaming around the Scarlet Forest, usually in groups, just doing their thing, waddling around, being loud, and just sort of vibing out in the open. They haven't really changed a lot though, which is fine. It's honestly kind of refreshing, to be honest. You don't want them to change because they are kind of nostalgic. But yeah, they still have the same sort of characteristics and same sort of problems that you end up have. So like, they're still a bit minging. Yeah, they still fart. Yeah, right in your face, and it still inflicts defense down as well. So, we're in a brand new generation, and Capcom are just like, yeah, let's keep the butt gas. You can respect them for that. Aside from the gas, though, in terms of their attacks, they'll tend to slap you with their arms or do this clumsy sort of body slam if they get mad, but they're not super threatening. Again, most of these small monsters are just more of an annoyance, especially when you're in the middle of a real fight and they roll up like, hey, here I am. As far as drops go, it's the usual stuff: Conga pelt, monster bones, maybe a few herbs depending on what they've been munching on. Basic stuff, but helpful early on for some low rank gear. If you've played the old titles as well, like Freedom Unite, seeing Congas again is pure nostalgia. So back when they were everywhere, like in the jungle, the swamp, just chilling in groups. Sometimes they'd even support the Congalala. They still do that now, though, to be honest. They still support the Congalala, and now it's like it's really they can really get in the way sometimes. So yeah, I think it's quite cool. It's like seeing these old school monsters like this reworked back into the Wilds ecosystem. So the thing is, they're not just there to be laughed at. They actually make the world feel alive, and I really like that. I really like that they brought them back. So next on the list is the Dalthodon, and this is actually a new herbivore which was introduced in Monster Hunter Wilds, and I actually think it's more than just sort of background fauna. You know, you tend to find them they're roaming in herds across the Windward Plains and the Scarlet Forest. They have like a grey and white skin and dark brown fur. Their heads are armoured as well, resembling like a shield, a feature that becomes a bit more pronounced as they mature as well. You know, they're generally quite docile, but they aren't really defenseless. When threatened, they kind of form like a defensive stance, using their evolved sort of cranial plating to ward off predators. It's to be honest, it's quite interesting. It's an interesting behaviour that really adds depth to the game's ecosystem, I think. Interestingly, you know, the people of Kunafa as well, they've kind of domesticated them as well, and they use them as livestock. So their milk is actually a key ingredient in the village's cheese. So again, it kind of highlights the creature's importance beyond the wilds as well. Although from a hunter's perspective, Dalthodons tend to drop raw meat and sturdy bones, which are useful for sort of early game crafting and cooking. They might not really pose a significant threat, but I just think their presence sort of enriches the game's world building. So yeah, that's the Dalthodon. Right, next on the list is the Gagios. Again, this is a new addition to Monster Hunter Wilds, and it's actually quite a sneaky one. I think they're probably my second favourite looking small monster. These are sort of like crocodile-like leviathans, and typically found in the Windward Plains and the Scarlet Forest, especially near bodies of water, because they are like that. They kind of crocodile-like creatures. They sort of have a unique behaviour of submerging themselves with only their snouts visible, waiting patiently for unsuspecting prey to come close. So again, a lot like crocodiles, alligators, and you know there were a lot of them back in the day as well. But obviously, again, like crocodiles, they are ambush predators. They strike swiftly when the opportunity arises. So their distinctive snouts lined with horn-like scales resemble like a double-sided sword, making their attacks particularly brutal. Like you can, I think, I mean, you see it plenty of times as well. If you actually watch them for long enough, they'll go and attack like herds of Ceratonoth or like Dalthodon. So yeah, it's a really interesting watch as well. Interestingly though, you can use a hook slinger to extract bleeding pods from them. It's obviously not without risk. They don't take kindly to being poked and prodded, unfortunately, but when you do eventually kill them, they can drop sharp fangs, and at high rank they drop acute fangs. And these materials can be essential for sort of early game crafting. Things like Talioth fan braces, Chattacabra coil, and providing modest defense and water resistance as well. So, yeah, that is the Gagios. Okay, next on our list is the Guardian Secret. And something a little bit different, really. They're not really a friendly, rideable secret. I'm talking about these angry, sort of ancient defense bot version that patrol the ruins like it's on high alert 24/7. Have you noticed that? Yeah, I always thought they were docile until I did this clip here, as you can see, and because I know they attack like larger monsters. I didn't think they attacked you, but I was wrong. I was so very wrong. You only find these in the ruins of Wyveria, so they're usually in the more sort of overgrown or decayed areas. They're sort of mechanical looking wyverns, I think, and they don't really mess around. They're really aggressive the moment they spot you. No warning, just sort of straight into a fight, as I found out. They use those sort of bladed front limbs to slice you, and if you're not careful, they'll call in their buddies to back them up. They usually travel in 2s or 3s, which can get real chaotic if you're sort of mid-hunt as well. And basically, when you take one down, they drop some pretty decent loot, to be honest. So Guardian feathers, some decent bones, and crafting materials for early gear like the Arkfield set. So they're really useful if you're building resistances early or just wanted to have that sort of ancient look. And what's wild is how different they are from the regular secrets as well. So the ones we see as mounts, so they're all about sort of mobility and utility, and the Guardian ones are full-on combat ones, so it makes you kind of wonder what they're protecting, really, or still are. Okay. Next on the list is the Gelitron. I'm going to say Gelitron or Gelidron. I'm going to call him Gelitron for now. So, again, another new monster that's been introduced in Monster Hunter Wilds, and honestly, they kind of remind you of like newts or salamanders, that kind of thing. They're definitely amphibious anyway, and you can tend to find these guys hanging around in like the oil well basin. They're like these weird sort of amphibious things, like a kind of mix between, like I said, like a newt, a salamander, and a bit of a weird blob of oil. Their skin's kind of shiny, like rainbow, slick shiny, thanks to the oil and the mucus that they're constantly covered in as well. They're actually ambush predators, believe it or not, which basically means they just chill in the muck until something stupid walks too close, and then BAM! Out comes the tongue, and whatever it was is gone. So it's pretty quick for something really, really horrible and gooey. Basically, though, if you do spook one, they'll try and scare you off, like they're doing in this clip here. They'll open their mouths really wide, like a like a warning display, like a lot of animals do in the real life. It looks more like a yawn though, if I'm honest. So if it doesn't work, they just slide back into the oil and vanish. So, but they are super annoying when you're trying to farm them when they do that. You can carve some decent meat off them, which the locals apparently really love. I mean, if you're into eating something that lives in oil, then go for it. But hey, it's good for rations and early game supplies. So, yeah, Galadron, really oily, weird, kind of gross, but definitely part of what makes the oil well basin feel alive. Okay, next on our list are the Harpios. So they're pretty low-key compared to some of the other monsters you'll run into in Monster Hunter Wilds. You'll kind of mostly spot them by water in places like Scarlet Forest or the oil well basin. That's where I've found them, in the oil well basin, really. They're small, sort of winged wyverns with a pretty sweet looking horn on their heads, I must say. Honestly though, they don't really do much other than just hang out and snack on fish. You can find them. One thing I always notice, and I really like this about them, again, another like sort of interaction they have with Monster Hunter Wilds, is in Area 17, and maybe some of the other areas in Scarlet Forest, you'll see like the pools of fish, and they actually dive into the pools and grab fish and like sort of fly back out, and that's a really cool interaction you can see. That happens quite often. They're not really the kind of monster that's going to chase you down though. They're quite, again, like I said, they're quite docile. Instead they're more into sort of sitting around waiting for smaller fish to surface, and then when that happens they just go wild and just feast on anything that comes near, to be honest. Although if you're not paying attention, you might miss them altogether. Like I said, they're pretty chill, but they'll take off if you get too close or make too much noise, so just don't really bother them. When you do end up taking one down, you'll get like a winged drake hide, which again is super useful for early game material. And obviously when they're in flight as well, and you kind of you press circle and you pull them down to the ground, you also get a piercing pod as well, which can be super duper useful in terms of, if you're like a bow user. Okay, next on our list are the Kranadath, and these are my absolute favourite small monster threat Monster Hunter Wilds. I absolutely adore the aesthetics, love the look of it, and honestly, they kind of remind, for me, they're like the raptors of the oil well basin. And, I did put a clip in right at the beginning of the introduction, but I've put the same clip again in because I thought it was so cool the way they interact. And just look at them as well. Super sharp teeth, tiny, tiny eyes. You'll basically find these guys hanging around in the oil well basin, especially in areas 13 and 14. They got like a bird wyvern type vibe, but they got like a really thick skull, cool red frill on the heads, and it's quite intimidating as well. So they can pack a punch. Their heads are built like tanks with thick plates, and they kind of expand and use to bash in anything they want. It's like they're always ready to headbutt something. So that's the way I see them. What's wild is that they'll go after monsters like way bigger than them. They'll jump and start headbutting a huge monster's skull, trying to stun it. So they can stun larger monsters, which is really cool. And it's pretty gutsy, really, for something that can't even reach that high. And if you do manage to take one down, you're going to get some kind of decent materials, really, like charred oil bone and Crandath skulls. And they do come in handy for crafting early game and other useful stuff as well. So, yeah, I really like these guys. Really useful. And this is the clip I meant, like, when they're hunting the Geladon or Geladon. How cool is that? They just headbutt it, smash it, kill it instantly, and then they just bring it, pick it up and bring it off and pile it on with the others. Awesome. And I think that's what Monster Hunter Wilds does really, really well. Like those interactions with other creatures. Right, coming up next are the Nasilla hatchlings. Now, they're like the sort of the offspring of the large Nasilla we've seen before, but they're a lot more annoying than they first seem, to be honest. Especially because there's so many of them as well. So. You will always find these in the Ice Shard Cliffs. It's the only place you can find them. So, while they don't have like the venom or web spitting abilities they just got one thing going from loads of numbers, just numbers and of loads of them. And they do move in packs. And if you get swarmed, it can be really annoying. They'll latch onto you and start biting away. So don't let them surround you, basically. Definitely not a fun time if you're caught off guard, let's put it that way. On the plus side, though, they're great for collecting monster fluid. So it's obviously, as you know, monster fluid is super handy for early crafting. Like they basically give it to you on a silver platter every time you carve one. You get in monster hunter fluid, so it's worth hunting them at least for that. Again, though, if you've played Monster Hunter 4, you'll remember the adult Nasilla being a pain with all those webs and traps, but with the hatchlings and wilds, it's less about trapping you and more about overwhelming you. It's a little bit different, but they still manage to be a pretty annoying part of the environment, though. So, next time you're in the Ice Shard Cliffs, guys, keep an eye out for these little creeps. They might look a bit harmless, but in a group, they can definitely ruin your day. Okay, let's talk about the Piragil. These little guys are basically the piranhas of the Scarlet Forest, and they can be made way more of a headache than you'd expect, to be honest. You'll mostly spot them swimming around in the Scarlet Forest, hanging around sort of bodies of water. They got these cool scales and sharp fins, which make them look pretty menacing, but basically they're only really troublesome when they travel in packs. They set their sights on someone, they can swarm you before you know what's hit you, really. I really struggled with this clip because a Rathian just came in and just started, and I think the Rathian was started attacking them and they were attacking the Rathian, and I was just there like, oh, okay, I'm going to let this happen. But basically, they're not really the type to attack on their own. If a big monster goes down, that's when you'll see a bunch of Piragil come in to finish the job. But basically, when you do take them down, you do get some decent materials like Piragil fins, sharp fangs, and macrolite ore. All solid stuff for crafting that sort of early game gear. So next time you're in the Scarlet Forest, guys, don't let the little guys catch you off guard. They're small, but in a pack they can be a real pain. So up next we got the Porky Plume. They're a bit like the pigs of the Ruins of Wyveria. They're not really a threat, but they've got their own little charm to them, you know. You'll tend to just find them around area 6 of Ruins of Wyveria. They got this like sort of pig snout, like soft feathers, and give a cute little vibe. Most of the time they're just kind of rooting around looking for plants and insects to snack on. They're not really going to bother you though unless you get too close. If you do, they'll freak out and just run off. Not exactly the type of monster that really wants to fight. But as you can see there in the clip, it just ran off. If you do end up taking one down though, you'll get Porky Plume feathers and beaks, solid materials for early game gear and decorations. Thing is, if you've played earlier Monster Hunter games, you might remember the Bombagi from Monster Hunter 4, for example. They're small, harmless creatures, but they were there to add a little bit of extra life to the world. The Porky Plume is the same kind of deal, really. They're not dangerous, but they do add a bit of a nice touch to the environment. So, if you do spot a Porky Plume next time you're in the Ruins of Wyveria, don't stress. They're just minding their own business, but hey, that's just how they roll, man. Coming up next on our list is the Ramtha, and again, these guys can They again they kind of like sheepy type things, like rams. I guess that's where the name comes from, Ramtha. That's my guess anyway. Um, they're not super dangerous, but they can be really annoying. Like they can knock you down, and they can give you a little bit of a hassle if you do get too close. The horns like that, I think they can paralyze you. You tend to find these guys in the ice shard cliffs, and they're covered in sort of soft feathers, and then most of the time they're just chilling, minding their own business. They kind of travel in herds. Like I said, they're not that aggressive, but you get too close, they can kind of catch you off guard, especially if you're hunting something big. Although if you do manage to take one down, you can get some useful things like sturdy bone, which is like a 25%, but mainly raw meat, to be honest. So yeah, it's not that great really. But what you can find with Ramtha is you can get, if you're looking for endemic life, for example, you can find Gorkies on them, especially in the Ice Shard Cliffs. You can obviously, if you can find Gorkies in the ruins of Wyveria as well, but in the Ice Shard Cliffs you can find them hanging around on the Ramtha, and they jump off if you get too close, which is quite cool. Okay, our penultimate monster is the Teleoth. Now, if you guys probably feel exactly the same way as I do, they are like the raptors of the Windward Plains. They look exactly like raptors. They act like raptors. They're pack hunters. You know, if they couldn't rip off Jurassic Park any more than they could with these things. But yeah, really cool. I changed my mind. They're probably like they're challenging the top 2 for like best looking small monsters on the game. I think they look really great. I think I love the look. They literally look like velociraptors. And they can also be super useful when it comes to fighting larger monsters as well, because they tend to attack them, which is great, really useful. They do end up turning aggressive if you're around them too long. Like if you stay around one of them, they'll all get up and start attacking you then, as you can see. But again, they're not that difficult to kill. They're pretty straightforward, but just make sure they don't kind of overwhelm you. And you know they're not too bad then, but they will like jump at you and claw at you and things like that. But they do go down pretty easily, to be honest. So not really too much of an issue. But yeah, I'm pretty sure they can only be found in the Windward Plains, so you would have to specifically go there to look for them. In terms of carving them, you'll get materials like Teleoth scales and sharp fangs, which are also useful for sort of early game crafting and decorations. So yeah. And last but not least, guys, probably the most annoying small monster of them all is the Vespoid. And as you guys know, they've been there since the start of the Monster Hunter franchise. They were annoying me back in Monster Hunter Freedom 2. They're annoying me still now when, you know, they can paralyze you. They can, you know, especially, I remember them being more of a nuisance, though, in Monster Hunter Freedom 2 than they are now. But yeah, they're still really annoying, but I don't think I've had that many sort of run-ins with them where they've really bugged me. Bugged. So yeah, they're still tiny, they still buzz around, and they've been ruining hunts since the early days. You'll find them loads of places, really. You'll find them. I found these ones particularly in the oil well basin, and yeah, they're just a pain. They got a tendency to paralyze you with their stings. You could be mid combo against the monster, and then one will just swoop in, bam, paralyzed. The thing is, if you hit the only problem is they're an absolute nightmare to actually carve, because if you hit them too hard, they just explode. So if you're looking for materials like wings and carapaces, or the occasional parachute, use a small weapon or poison to bring them. Like I think in the old days, I used to use and I think Monster Hunter Worlds as well. I used to use poison clouds and they die of poison. Obviously they don't explode, they just drop to the ground. And yeah, they're really great for crafting status gear, especially early on in the game. But yeah, they haven't really changed all that much from, you know, the old Monster Hunter games to Monster Hunter Worlds and Monster Hunter Wilds, to be honest. So I like to think of them as the stars of the show, of the small monsters, really. That's why I kind of, well, I mean, they're alphabetically, they know they're last, but I think I also saved the best for last. Anyway, guys, that is my video on the small monsters throughout Monster Hunter Wilds. I hope you enjoyed it. Coming up next, I'm gonna start showing you guys the larger monsters. I'll probably be, you know, killing them in the videos and just showing you something similar like this, a little bit of background about them, and yeah, just see what you guys think. So again, hope you enjoyed the video, guys. If you have liked it, give me a like and subscribe for more great Monster Hunter Wilds content.